She was barely 5 feet tall and weighed maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. They called her Pocket behind her back, thinking she couldn't hear. But when the explosion ripped through the mountainside and 3 Navy SEALs lay bleeding in a canyon with no helicopter landing zone and no backup coming, Maya Rodriguez didn't think about her size. She thought about getting them home. What happened next in those Afghan mountains would rewrite everything anyone thought they knew about strength. Sometimes the smallest person carries the heaviest load. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Rodriguez had been invisible her entire life, and she preferred it that way. At Forward Operating Base Thunder, nestled in the unforgiving terrain of eastern Afghanistan, she moved through her duties like a ghost in desert camouflage. 5 feet nothing, barely clearing the height requirements for military service, with delicate features that made seasoned soldiers want to protect her rather than trust her in combat. She wasn't supposed to be there, really, not according to the old guard anyway. Women in combat roles were still a controversial topic in 2012, and a woman who looked like she belonged in a college library raised even more eyebrows. But Maya had something that couldn't be measured in inches or pounds, an unshakable determination that had carried her through every challenge life had thrown her way. Growing up in East Los Angeles, Maya learned early that the world would underestimate her. The youngest of 4 children, she watched her older brothers tower over her by the time they hit middle school. Her father, a construction foreman, used to shake his head and wonder aloud how such a tiny girl could possibly follow in the family tradition of hard labor. Her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts at County General, saw something different. She saw the way Maya never gave up, never backed down, never let her size define what she could accomplish. When Maya announced she was joining the Army, her family's reaction was predictable. Her brothers laughed, her father worried. Her mother just nodded and said, "Mija, you've always been stronger than you look." Boot camp was hell. Maya knew it would be, but knowing and experiencing were 2 different things. Drill Sergeant Williams took one look at her on day 1 and seemed to make it his personal mission to break her. Extra push-ups, longer runs, heavier packs. He paired her with the biggest, strongest recruits for combat exercises, watching with obvious amusement as she got tossed around like a rag doll during hand-to-hand combat training. But Maya had learned something growing up with 3 older brothers who never went easy on her. Size wasn't everything. Speed mattered, intelligence mattered, heart mattered most of all. She couldn't overpower her opponents, so she outthought them. She couldn't match their reach, so she used her low center of gravity. She couldn't intimidate them with her presence, so she earned their respect with her persistence. By week 8, even Williams had stopped smirking. Maya might have been the smallest soldier in the platoon, but she was finishing obstacle courses in record time, hitting targets with precision that made the marksmanship instructors take notice, and carrying wounded soldiers twice her size during medical evacuation drills without breaking stride. The Army recognized her potential and fast-tracked her into combat medic training. Here, finally, Maya found her element. The same attention to detail that made her a good student made her an exceptional medic. The same stubborn refusal to give up that helped her survive basic training made her the kind of medic who would crawl through enemy fire to reach a wounded soldier. But even among the medical corps, Maya remained an oddity. Combat medics were supposed to be big, strong, capable of hauling wounded soldiers to safety under fire. Maya looked like she needed saving herself. Her instructors worried. Her fellow medics, mostly men who stood 6 feet tall and could bench press their body weight, treated her like a little sister who had wandered into the wrong classroom. Staff Sergeant Rebecca Torres, one of the few female medics in Maya's training class, pulled her aside during the final week of training. "Listen, Rodriguez," she said, her voice a mixture of concern and frustration. "You're good at this, better than good. But out there, in the real world, these boys are going to look at you and see someone they need to protect instead of someone who can protect them. You need to prove yourself fast, or you'll spend your whole deployment writing a desk." Maya nodded, understanding the reality even if she didn't like it. She'd been proving herself her whole life. Afghanistan would be no different. Forward Operating Base Thunder was exactly what Maya expected. a collection of prefabricated buildings, concrete barriers, and guard towers carved out of hostile territory. The base housed roughly 300 personnel, from infantry grunts to intelligence analysts to the rotating special operations teams that used Thunder as a staging ground for missions deeper into Taliban territory. Maya was assigned to the base medical facility, a surprisingly well-equipped field hospital that served not just the soldiers at Thunder but also the smaller outposts scattered throughout the region. Dr. James Patterson, the chief medical officer, was a former emergency room surgeon from Chicago who'd volunteered for deployment after his divorce. He took one look at Maya's file and seemed impressed despite himself. "Harvard Medical School couldn't have trained you better," he said, after watching her work her first week. "But can you handle the physical demands? Because out here, being a good medic isn't just about starting IVs and administering medications. Sometimes you're the difference between a soldier coming home and not coming home, and that difference might come down to whether you can carry a 200-pound man through a minefield." Maya met his gaze steadily. "Give me the chance to prove it, sir." That chance would come sooner than anyone expected. The base operated on a rhythm that Maya quickly learned to read. Morning briefings, routine patrols, equipment maintenance, training exercises. The special operations teams came and went like shadows, arriving under cover of darkness, planning their missions in classified briefings, then disappearing into the mountains for days at a time. Maya watched these elite soldiers with a mixture of admiration and frustration. They were the best of the best, no question. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Delta Force operators. But they looked at her the same way everyone else did, like a mascot rather than a medical professional who might one day hold their lives in her hands. Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan epitomized their attitude. A towering SEAL with 15 years of experience and arms like tree trunks, Sullivan treated Maya with the kind of patronizing kindness reserved for children and small animals. He'd ruffle her hair when he passed the medical tent, call her Doc with an amused smile, and make jokes about needing a stepladder to reach the medical supplies. "No offense, Doc," he said one evening after bringing a teammate in for treatment of a sprained ankle, "but if I go down out there, I need to know someone can actually get me out. You're good at what you do, but physics is physics." Maya cleaned the wound with professional detachment, applied the bandage with precise movements, and handed him the discharge instructions without comment. She'd heard it all before. She'd hear it again. But she also knew something Sullivan didn't. When the moment came, physics would be the least of their problems. The team that would change everything arrived on a Tuesday in October. 3 Navy SEALs. Chief Sullivan, whom Maya already knew. Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, a demolitions expert from Texas with a drawl as thick as his neck, and Petty Officer Danny Kowalski, a communications specialist from Detroit who looked like he'd stepped off a recruiting poster. They were planning a high-value target raid deep in the mountains, a mission classified so far above Maya's clearance level that she only knew about it because she overheard fragments of conversation when they came in for their pre-mission medical clearance. "Rough terrain," Thompson was saying as Maya checked his blood pressure. 3 days minimum, maybe 5 if the weather turns. "Extraction point is 12 clicks from the target," Kowalski added, checking his watch. "Long walk if something goes wrong." Sullivan, ever the leader, just grunted. "Nothing's going wrong. In and out, clean and simple." Maya finished her examinations and signed off on their medical clearances, watching as they gathered their gear and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. She had no way of knowing that in 72 hours she would be carrying all 3 of them down a mountain that had become their tomb. The silence stretched for 3 days. Maya had learned to read the rhythm of special operations missions during her 8 months at Thunder. Teams went dark for predetermined periods, checking in at scheduled intervals with coded transmissions that revealed nothing to enemy listeners but everything to the operations center. When those check-ins stopped coming, the base held its breath. Maya was rotating through her evening rounds in the medical facility when Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice crackled over the base-wide communication system. "All medical personnel to the briefing room, priority 1. Dr. Patterson was already moving, his usual calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity Maya had come to associate with mass casualty events.
"Rodriguez, grab the trauma kit and meet me in ops," he called over his shoulder. The operations center buzzed with controlled chaos. Radio operators hunched over their equipment, adjusting frequencies and boosting signal strength. Intelligence analysts pored over satellite imagery on multiple screens. In the center of it all, Colonel Harrison stood beside a large tactical map, his weathered face grim. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harrison began as the medical team assembled. "At 1400 hours local time, we lost contact with Team Razor. The last known position was here." He pointed to a remote valley in the Hindu Kush Mountains, 60 kilometers northeast of the base. Intelligence suggests they encountered unexpected resistance during their primary objective. Captain Nicole Foster, the base intelligence officer, stepped forward. "Satellite imagery from this morning shows evidence of an explosion in the target area. Significant debris field, possible IED detonation. We've detected no movement from friendly forces." Maya felt her stomach tighten. Sullivan, Thompson, and Kowalski had been out there for 3 days in some of the most hostile terrain in Afghanistan. If they were wounded, time was running out fast. "Weather window opens at 600 tomorrow. We'll have 2 hours of clear skies for helicopter operations before the next storm system moves in. The rescue team launches at first light." Dr. Patterson raised his hand. "What's the terrain like for medical evacuation?" "Challenging," Foster replied, pulling up topographical data on the main screen. "The target area is in a narrow canyon at 8,000 feet elevation. Steep walls, unstable ground, no suitable landing zones for helicopters within 3 kilometers. Any rescue operation will require significant overland movement."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Maya studied the imagery, her mind automatically calculating distances and elevation changes. 3 kilometers didn't sound like much until you factored in carrying wounded soldiers through mountain terrain while potentially under enemy fire. "Search and rescue team composition?" Patterson asked. 12-man element, Harrison replied. "Mixed Army Rangers and Marine Force Recon, plus medical support. Dr. Patterson, you'll lead the medical team. Take whoever you need." Patterson nodded, then turned to Maya. "Rodriguez, I want you with us." The room fell silent. Maya felt every pair of eyes turned toward her, measuring, evaluating, finding her wanting. She was used to the looks, but this time felt different. This wasn't training or routine medical care. Lives hung in the balance. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen, the senior medic on base, cleared his throat. "Doc, with respect, maybe Sergeant Williams would be a better choice for this one. The physical demands—" Rodriguez cut him off firmly. "If our boys are hurt as bad as I think they might be, we need the best hands available, not the strongest backs." Maya appreciated the vote of confidence, but she could see the doubt in every face around her. Even among the medical team, she remained the question mark. The briefing broke up with assignments handed out and equipment lists distributed. Maya found herself walking back to the medical facility with Chen, who'd been at Thunder for 2 full deployments. "Look, Rodriguez," Chen said quietly, "Patterson's right about your skills. Nobody's questioning that. But out there," he gestured toward the mountains visible through the facility windows, "it's not like the training exercises. If someone goes down, you might be the only thing standing between them and a body bag. Are you sure you can handle that kind of pressure?" Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. "Mike, how many times have you seen me crack under pressure?" Chen considered this. In 8 months, he'd watched Maya handle everything from routine injuries to combat wounds from IED attacks. She'd never hesitated, never panicked, never needed help making critical decisions. "Never," he admitted. "Then trust me now." The rescue team assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, their equipment staged near the helicopter landing pad. Maya checked and rechecked her medical supplies. Trauma bandages, morphine, IV fluids, chest seals, tourniquets, everything she might need to keep wounded soldiers alive during a difficult evacuation.
Her pack weighed nearly 60 pounds, almost half her body weight, but she'd trained with heavier loads. Captain Rodriguez, no relation despite the shared surname, led the rescue element. A decorated ranger with 3 combat deployments, he commanded respect from the mixed team of special operations soldiers. Maya had worked with some of them before, treating injuries from training exercises and minor mission mishaps. They knew her capabilities in controlled situations, but this would be different. The flight took 90 minutes, the helicopter pilot navigating through mountain passes with the kind of precision that made Maya grateful she wasn't afraid of heights. Through the aircraft windows, she watched the landscape change from the familiar desert around Thunder to increasingly rugged mountains covered with snow-dusted peaks. "Landing zone in 5 minutes," the pilot announced through the intercom. "Weather's holding, but I can't guarantee the same conditions for extraction. You might have a long walk home." Captain Rodriguez acknowledged and turned to his team. "Remember, we don't know what we're walking into up there. Enemy forces might still be in the area. Medical concerns are priority 1, but security comes first. Nobody dies trying to be a hero." The helicopter touched down in a small clearing, 3 kilometers from the target area, just as intelligence had predicted. Maya felt the thin mountain air hit her lungs as they disembarked, the altitude making every breath feel insufficient. Around her, the Rangers and Marines moved with practiced efficiency, while she and the senior medic prepared to move out. The hike to the target area took 2 hours, through terrain that challenged even the experienced mountain fighters on the team. Maya found herself grateful for all those childhood hikes with her father in the mountains outside Los Angeles, the weekend trips that had built her endurance and taught her to read the landscape. What she hadn't expected was how the altitude would affect her differently than the larger men on the team. While the Rangers and Marines struggled with the thin air, Maya's smaller lungs and more efficient metabolism gave her an unexpected advantage. By the time they reached the edge of the target canyon, she was breathing easier than soldiers twice her size. "Jesus," whispered Sergeant First Class David Park, the team's forward observer, as he peered over the canyon rim through high-powered binoculars. "It's worse than the satellite imagery showed." Maya crawled up beside him and looked down into the canyon. The explosion had carved a crater 15 feet across in the canyon floor. Debris was scattered everywhere, pieces of equipment, chunks of rock, and in the center of it all, 3 motionless figures in desert camouflage. "Are they?" someone started to ask. "Movement," Park said sharply. "Southeast corner. One of them just moved his arm." Captain Rodriguez took the binoculars and studied the scene. "I see it, but I also see why the helicopter couldn't land. That canyon's a death trap. Steep walls, unstable ground, and only one way in." "How do we get down there?" asked Corporal Lisa Martinez, the team's youngest member. Rodriguez studied the terrain through his binoculars. "Ropes. We'll have to rappel down the north wall, but it's gonna be slow going. And getting wounded soldiers back up," he shook his head, "that's gonna be a problem." Maya studied the canyon walls, her mind working through the logistics. The north wall offered the best route down, but bringing injured soldiers back up that same route would require multiple team members and specialized equipment they didn't have. The south wall was too steep and unstable, but there was a third option nobody had mentioned yet. "What about the east approach?" she asked, pointing to where the canyon narrowed into what looked like a natural ramp. Park swung his binoculars toward the area Maya indicated. "Blocked by rockfall. Looks like the explosion brought down half the mountainside." "Not blocked," Maya said, studying the debris field more carefully. "Just difficult. There's a path through the rocks, maybe one person at a time." Rodriguez took another look. "Even if you're right, it's exposed. Anyone moving through there would be visible for miles." "But it's the only route that doesn't require ropes for the return trip," Maya pointed out. "If we're dealing with serious injuries, that might be our only option." The team leader considered this, weighing tactical concerns against medical necessity. Finally, he nodded. "We'll send a reconnaissance team down the north wall first, assess the casualties, determine what we're dealing with. Then we'll decide on extraction routes." Maya opened her mouth to volunteer, then caught herself. She could see the same calculation happening in every team member's mind. Who was expendable enough to risk on a dangerous reconnaissance mission, but skilled enough to provide accurate medical assessment? "I'll go," offered Park. "Negative," Rodriguez replied. "I need you up here with the long gun in case we have company. Martinez, you're with me." "Captain," Maya interrupted quietly. "With respect, if those men are seriously injured, you need someone who can provide immediate medical intervention, not just assessment. Every minute we wait increases the risk of losing them." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. Maya could see him weighing her medical skills against her size, her experience against the physical demands of what they were asking. "The rappel down is 40 feet, he said finally. "In full gear with medical equipment, that's a significant physical challenge. And if we need to extract casualties quickly, then we use the east route," Maya said firmly. "It's the only way to get wounded soldiers out of there without requiring multiple personnel for rope systems. And if I'm already down there providing medical care, you don't lose time on a second trip." The silence stretched as Rodriguez considered the options. Maya knew what he was thinking. In ideal circumstances, he'd sent his biggest, strongest soldier down to assess the situation. But circumstances were far from ideal, and sometimes the right tool for the job wasn't the biggest one available. "Rodriguez," he said finally, "you're sure about that eastern route?" Maya nodded, though her heart was racing. She'd identified the path through the rockfall, but she hadn't mentioned how narrow it looked, or how exposed it would leave anyone attempting to use it. Sometimes confidence was more important than complete honesty. "All right, here's how we do this. Martinez will anchor the rope while Rodriguez rappels down to assess casualties. Once we have a medical evaluation, we'll determine the best extraction route and proceed accordingly." Maya checked her gear one final time, ensuring her medical supplies were secure and easily accessible. As she prepared for the descent, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Not just for the wounded SEALs in the canyon below, but for her understanding of what she was truly capable of accomplishing. The rope felt solid in her hands as she prepared to rappel into what might become either her greatest triumph or her final mission. The rope burned against Maya's gloves as she controlled her descent down the canyon wall. 40 feet had never seemed so far, each meter taking her deeper into a landscape that looked increasingly hostile. The explosion crater dominated the canyon floor below, its edges still smoking faintly in the thin mountain air. Scattered debris created a maze of twisted metal and broken stone, and somewhere in that chaos lay 3 men whose lives now depend entirely on her abilities. Maya's boots touched solid ground with a soft thud that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. She immediately unclipped from the rappelling rope and signaled to Captain Rodriguez above, who was positioned to provide overwatch with his rifle scope. The agreed-upon hand signals felt inadequate for what she was seeing, but radio silence was essential until she could assess potential enemy presence. The silence in the canyon was absolute, except for the wind through the rock formations above. Maya moved carefully through the debris field, her medical training automatically cataloging potential hazards: unstable rubble that could shift underfoot, sharp metal fragments that could cause secondary injuries, and the persistent smell of explosives that suggested the possibility of unexploded ordnance. Chief Sullivan lay closest to the blast crater, his massive frame crumpled against a boulder that had probably saved his life by shielding him from the worst of the explosion. Maya approached him with practiced caution, her hands already reaching for the trauma supplies in her pack. His uniform was shredded along the left side, dark stains spreading across the desert camouflage pattern that could only mean significant blood loss. She dropped to her knees beside him and immediately began her primary assessment. Airway clear, breathing shallow but present, pulse rapid and thready. Sullivan's eyes fluttered open as she checked his pupils for signs of concussion. "Doc?" His voice was barely a whisper, confused and weak. "What are you doing here?" "Saving your life," Maya replied, her hands already working to expose the wounds hidden beneath his torn uniform. "Try not to move. I need to see what we're dealing with." The shrapnel damage was extensive, but not immediately life-threatening. Multiple lacerations across his left side and arm, some deep enough to require surgical closure, but none hitting major blood vessels. More concerning was the way he favored his right leg, suggesting possible fracture or severe soft tissue damage. Thompson and Kowalski? Sullivan managed, trying to lift his head to look around the canyon. "I'm checking on them next," Maya said, applying pressure bandages to the worst of his wounds. "But right now I need you to stay still and let me work." She injected him with morphine for pain management and started an IV line to address the blood loss. Sullivan's color was improving already, the immediate shock wearing off as his body began to respond to treatment. Maya marked his forehead with a field triage tag indicating his condition and moved toward the second casualty. Petty Officer Thompson was unconscious when she reached him, his large frame partially buried under loose rock near the canyon's eastern wall. The demolition expert had been thrown nearly 20 feet from the blast site, his body coming to rest in a position that immediately concerned Maya from a spinal injury perspective.
"Thompson," she called softly, not wanting to move him until she could assess potential neck trauma. "Can you hear me?" No response. Maya carefully checked his airway while maintaining cervical spine alignment, relieved to find his breathing steady and unobstructed. His pulse was strong but elevated, and when she lifted his eyelids, his pupils responded normally to her penlight. Good signs, but the head injury was still a major concern. The blood trail leading from the blast crater to Thompson's current position told the story of his impact and slide across the rocky ground. Road rash covered most of his exposed skin, and his left shoulder sat at an unnatural angle that screamed dislocation or fracture. But it was the depression in the ground where his head had finally come to rest that worried Maya most. She immobilized his neck with a cervical collar from her trauma kit and carefully exposed his torso to check for additional injuries. 3 broken ribs on the right side, evidenced by the instability she felt during her examination and Thompson's involuntary grimace even in unconsciousness when she palpated the area. Possible internal bleeding, though his vital signs remained relatively stable. Maya established a second IV line and administered pain medication, then moved to address the shoulder injury. In a hospital setting, she would have waited for X-rays and orthopedic consultation. In this canyon, with a storm system approaching and enemy forces potentially in the area, she had to make field-expedient decisions based on clinical judgment alone. The shoulder was definitely dislocated. Maya positioned herself carefully and used a technique she'd learned during advanced trauma training, applying steady traction while rotating Thompson's arm through a specific range of motion. The joint relocated with an audible pop that echoed off the canyon walls, and Thompson's breathing immediately became less labored as the pressure on surrounding nerves was relieved. 2 down, 1 to go. Maya tagged Thompson and gathered her supplies, scanning the canyon floor for Petty Officer Kowalski. She found him furthest from the blast site, near the mouth of the canyon where he'd apparently been thrown by the explosion's force. His position told a different story than the others. Instead of being caught directly in the blast, he'd been far enough away to be picked up and hurled by the pressure wave. Kowalski was conscious when she reached him, his eyes tracking her movement as she approached. That was encouraging from a neurological standpoint, but the way he was breathing, short, sharp gasps that barely moved his chest, immediately triggered her trauma training alarm bells. "Hey, Doc," he managed, his voice tight with pain. "Glad to see you. Thought we were done for." Maya knelt beside him and began her assessment, noting immediately that his skin had a grayish pallor and his neck veins were distended, classic signs of tension pneumothorax. The explosion had likely caused blunt chest trauma, collapsing one of his lungs and creating a life-threatening emergency that would only get worse without immediate intervention. "Danny, I need you to stay calm," Maya said, her hands already moving to expose his chest. "You've got a collapsed lung, but I can fix it. This is going to hurt for a second, but then you'll be able to breathe again." Kowalski's eyes widened with fear, but he nodded. Maya had performed needle decompression before, but always in controlled hospital environments with backup equipment and additional medical personnel. Doing it alone in a canyon with improvised equipment was something else entirely. She located the anatomical landmarks by feel, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, and prepared a large-gauge needle from her trauma kit.
No time for elaborate sterile procedures. She cleaned the insertion site quickly with alcohol and positioned the needle. "Deep breath," she told Kowalski, then plunged the needle through his chest wall into the pleural space. The rush of air escaping through the needle was immediate and dramatic. Kowalski's breathing eased instantly, his color began to improve, and the distended veins in his neck started to flatten. Maya secured the needle in place and attached a flutter valve improvised from the plastic packaging of her medical supplies. "Better?" she asked. Kowalski nodded, already breathing more easily. "Much better. Thanks, Doc." Maya started her third IV line of the morning and administered pain medication, then conducted a more thorough examination. Kowalski had multiple rib fractures and significant bruising across his back and legs, but the pneumothorax had been the immediate life threat. With that addressed, he was stable enough for transport. As she tagged Kowalski and prepared to signal the rescue team above, Maya took a moment to assess the overall situation. 3 wounded SEALs, all requiring medical evacuation, all too injured to walk out under their own power. The canyon's steep walls and unstable ground made helicopter extraction impossible, and the traditional rope systems would require multiple trips and extensive manpower. That left the eastern route she'd identified during the initial reconnaissance, a narrow path through the rockfall that would allow her to move the casualties one at a time to a more accessible location. The path looked treacherous from the canyon floor, with loose stones and steep grades that would challenge even a healthy person. Carrying wounded soldiers through it seemed nearly impossible. But Maya had learned something during her assessment of the 3 men. Impossible wasn't the same as undoable. It just meant nobody had figured out how to do it yet. She looked up at the canyon rim where Captain Rodriguez waited with the rest of the rescue team. The hand signal she'd been using could convey basic medical information, but not the complexity of what she was planning. Maya made the decision to risk radio communication, using the emergency medical frequency that would be monitored by the operations center at Thunder. "Rescue 6, this is Combat Medic Rodriguez. I have 3 casualties, all stable but requiring immediate evacuation. Recommend alternate extraction route via eastern approach. Over." Rodriguez's voice crackled through her earpiece immediately. "Combat Medic Rodriguez, what's your assessment of casualty mobility? Can any of them walk assisted? Over." Maya looked at Sullivan, who was conscious but weakened by blood loss and potentially compromised by his leg injury. Thompson remained unconscious with a suspected concussion and multiple fractures. Kowalski was alert but had broken ribs and ongoing respiratory issues. "Negative on assisted walking," she replied. "All 3 require carry evacuation. The eastern route is our only option for getting them to a helicopter landing zone. Over."
There was a long pause before Rodriguez responded. "Combat Medic Rodriguez, understand your assessment. The eastern route appears extremely hazardous for carry operations. Are you certain this is advisable? Over." Maya studied the narrow path through the rockfall again, calculating distances and angles. It would mean 3 separate trips through unstable terrain while carrying men who outweighed her by 60 to 80 pounds each. The physical demands were staggering, and the risk of injury to herself or further harm to the casualties was significant. But the alternative was waiting for additional resources that might not arrive before the weather window closed, leaving all 4 of them trapped in the canyon overnight in sub-freezing temperatures with limited medical supplies and possible enemy forces in the area. "Rescue 6, I'm certain. Beginning casualty movement now. Combat Medic Rodriguez out." Maya turned off her radio and looked at the 3 wounded SEALs who were now entirely dependent on her abilities. Sullivan was watching her with a mixture of gratitude and concern. Even injured and medicated, he understood the mathematics of what she was proposing. "Doc," he said quietly, "you don't have to prove anything to us. We can wait for additional support." Maya knelt beside him and checked his IV line, ensuring the flow rate was optimal for his condition. "Chief, with respect, waiting isn't an option. The weather window closes in 4 hours, and your core body temperature is already dropping. We move now, or we don't move at all." She stood and shouldered her medical pack, then looked toward the eastern wall of the canyon where the narrow path wound upward through the debris field. The route looked even more intimidating from ground level, but Maya had made her decision. "Besides," she added, allowing herself a small smile,
Someone once told me that physics is physics. Time to find out if that's really true. Maya stood at the base of the eastern wall, studying the path that would either prove her right or kill them all. The route through the rockfall looked like something designed by a sadistic engineer. Loose stones balanced precariously on steep inclines, narrow ledges that barely accommodated one person, and gaps between boulders that required careful navigation even without carrying a wounded soldier. She'd made the tactical decision to move Kowalski first. Despite his chest injury, he was the most alert and could potentially assist with his own movement if necessary. His lighter frame, only about 170 pounds compared to Sullivan's 220 or Thompson's muscular 200, also made him the logical choice for testing the route's viability. "Danny," she said, kneeling beside him as she prepared for the carry, "I'm going to get you up to where the helicopter can reach us, but I need you to help me as much as you can. If something starts to hurt worse than it already does, you tell me immediately." Kowalski nodded, his breathing still labored but much improved since the needle decompression. "Doc, are you sure about this? That path looks like it was designed to kill people." Maya had been asking herself the same question. The logical answer was no. She wasn't sure about anything, except that staying in the canyon meant slow death from exposure and blood loss. But logic wasn't always the same as truth, and the truth was that she'd been underestimated her entire life because people confuse size with capability. "I'm sure enough," she replied, checking his IV line one final time. "We're going to take this slow and careful. I'll carry you fireman style to distribute the weight better, and we'll rest whenever you need to." The fireman's carry was a technique Maya had drilled countless times during medical training, designed to allow a single person to transport an injured individual over moderate distances. She'd never attempted it with someone 60 pounds heavier than herself across terrain that belongs in a mountaineering manual, but the physics were sound, even if the circumstances were extreme. Maya positioned herself beside Kowalski and helped him into a sitting position, monitoring his breathing for any signs that the movement was compromising his lung function. The chest tube she'd improvised was holding, but any significant jarring could dislodge it or worsen his internal injuries. "On three," she said, squatting down and positioning her shoulder against his midsection. "1, 2, 3. The lift was harder than she'd expected. Kowalski's dead weight seemed to double the moment she took it onto her frame, and for a terrifying instant, Maya thought her legs might buckle. But the thousands of hours she'd spent in the gym preparing for military service paid off. Her core muscles engaged, her spine straightened, and she found her balance with Kowalski draped across her shoulders. "You okay?" she asked, breathing hard from the initial effort. "Better than walking," Kowalski managed, his voice strained but clear. Maya took her first steps toward the eastern wall, immediately realizing that every assumption she'd made about the difficulty was conservative. The additional weight threw off her center of gravity, making each step a calculated risk. The rocky ground that seemed stable under her own weight felt treacherous with Kowalski's mass added to her own. The initial approach to the rockfall was the easiest part of the route, across relatively flat ground littered with debris from the explosion. Maya picked her way carefully between twisted metal fragments and chunks of stone, testing each footstep before committing her full weight. Behind her, she could hear Sullivan's voice calling encouragement, though she was too focused on navigation to make out the specific words. The real challenge began where the path entered the rockfall proper. What had looked like a manageable incline from the canyon floor revealed itself to be a series of near-vertical climbs between massive boulders, with loose scree that shifted underfoot and handholds that crumbled when tested. Maya paused at the base of the first major obstacle, studying the route ahead with growing concern. "Doc," Kowalski said quietly, "maybe we should reconsider this." Maya understood his concern. The boulder field stretched upward for at least 50 meters, and from this angle, it looked less like a path and more like a rock climbing route that would challenge even experienced mountaineers. But turning back meant accepting defeat, and Maya had never been good at accepting defeat. "We're committed now," she replied, checking her grip on Kowalski's legs where they hung across her chest. "Besides, I didn't carry you this far just to give up at the first real obstacle." The climb began with a series of small steps from rock to rock, each one requiring careful balance and precise foot placement. Maya discovered that Kowalski's weight, while challenging, also provided some advantages. His mass lowered their combined center of gravity and made them less likely to be blown off balance by the wind that whipped through the canyon. 20 meters up, Maya encountered her first serious obstacle, a gap between boulders that was just wide enough to require a small jump, but too narrow to safely navigate with a wounded man on her shoulders. She studied the alternative routes, all of which appeared even more hazardous. "Danny, I need you to help me here," she said, setting him down carefully on a stable ledge. "I'm going to scout the next section, and then we'll figure out the best way to get you across." Maya climbed ahead alone, testing handholds and foot placements, mapping out the safest route through the next section of rockfall. The gap that had looked impossible from below could be navigated by stepping across to a small ledge, then traversing sideways for several meters before climbing again. It would require Kowalski to be more mobile than she'd hoped, but it was doable. She returned to where he waited and explained the route. "I'll go first and get into position to help pull you across the gap. Then we continue with the carry on the other side." Kowalski nodded, though Maya could see the pain medication was wearing off and his discomfort was increasing. "Whatever you need, Doc. Just tell me where to put my feet." The traverse took nearly an hour, with Maya constantly adjusting their route as obstacles proved more challenging than they'd appeared from a distance. Loose stones cascaded down the slope with every step, creating a small avalanche effect that made her grateful no one was climbing below them. The physical effort was enormous. Maya found herself breathing hard and sweating despite the cold mountain air. But gradually, step by step, they made progress up the slope. Maya's legs burned with the constant effort of carrying Kowalski's weight, and her shoulders ached from the awkward positioning required by the fireman's carry. Several times she had to set him down and rest, using the brakes to check his condition and ensure his improvised chest tube remained functional. "How much further?" Kowalski asked during one of their rest stops, his voice showing the strain of the climb. Maya looked up at the remaining route, calculating distances and elevation changes. They were roughly halfway through the rockfall, with the steepest sections still ahead. But they'd proven the route was passable, and Maya felt her confidence growing with each successful obstacle they'd overcome. "Another hour, maybe 90 minutes," she replied. "The worst part is behind us." She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't realize it until they reached the final approach to the top of the rockfall. The last section of the climb was a near-vertical scramble over loose scree that shifted with every step. Maya had to abandon the fireman's carry and help Kowalski climb under his own power, supporting his weight while guiding his feet to secure holds. His breathing became labored again from the exertion, and Maya worried that the chest tube might become dislodged. "Easy, Danny," she said, as they navigated a particularly treacherous section where the path narrowed to barely shoulder width. "We're almost there." The top of the rockfall opened onto a small plateau that offered the first truly safe ground they'd encountered since leaving the canyon floor. Maya helped Kowalski to a sitting position against a large boulder and immediately checked his vital signs. His pulse was elevated from the exertion, but his breathing remained stable and the chest tube was still functioning properly. "You did good," she told him, starting a new IV bag to replace the one that had run empty during the climb. "Like I got blown up and then carried up a mountain by someone half my size," Kowalski replied with a weak grin, "but alive, thanks to you." Maya looked back down at the route they'd just climbed, hardly believing they'd managed it successfully. From this vantage point, the path looked even more impossible than it had from below, a zigzag route through unstable terrain that should have been impossible for anyone carrying additional weight. But they'd done it. Kowalski was safe, positioned where helicopter evacuation would be possible once the aircraft arrived. Maya had proven the route was viable, though the physical cost had been enormous. Her legs trembled with fatigue, her shoulders ached, and she was breathing hard despite the cold mountain air. And she still had 2 more SEALs to carry up that same impossible path. Maya's radio crackled to life as Captain Rodriguez checked in from his overwatch position. "Combat Medic Rodriguez, we observed your movement up the eastern route. Status report on casualty and route conditions." "Casualty 1 is stable and in position for helicopter evacuation," Maya replied, her voice showing the strain of the climb. "The route is passable but extremely challenging. Beginning descent for Casualty 2. There was a pause before Rodriguez responded. "Combat Medic Rodriguez, are you physically capable of repeating that carry 2 more times? No shame in requesting additional support." Maya looked down at the canyon, where Sullivan and Thompson waited, both depending entirely on her ability to repeat what she'd just accomplished. The smart answer was to request help, to admit that the physical demands were beyond reasonable expectations for someone her size. But Maya had never been satisfied with the smart answer when lives were at stake. "Affirmative," she replied. "Beginning descent now. Combat Medic Rodriguez, out." She checked Kowalski's position one final time, ensuring he was stable and warm, then began the treacherous descent back to the canyon floor. The route down was in some ways more challenging than the climb up. Loose stones wanted to carry her forward faster than she could control, and without Kowalski's weight to anchor her, she felt unstable and prone to slipping. But gravity worked in her favor for the descent, and within 40 minutes she was back at the bottom of the canyon where Sullivan and Thompson waited. Both men were awake now, watching her approach with expressions that mixed gratitude with disbelief. "1 down, 2 to go," Maya announced, though her voice betrayed the exhaustion she felt. "Who wants to be next?"
Maya knelt beside Sullivan, her hands shaking slightly as she checked his IV line. The tremor wasn't from cold or fear. It was pure physical exhaustion. The first carry had depleted energy reserves she hadn't known she possessed, and now she faced the prospect of carrying a man who outweighed Kowalski by 50 pounds up that same punishing route. "Doc," Sullivan said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years leading men in impossible situations. "You look like hell. Maybe it's time to call for backup." Maya met his gaze steadily. Sullivan's color had improved since she'd started the IV, but his leg was clearly causing significant pain despite the morphine. The swelling around his knee suggested ligament damage that would make any assisted walking impossible, even if they had an easier route available. "How's your pain level, Chief?" she asked, avoiding his suggestion about backup that they both knew wasn't coming. "Manageable," Sullivan replied, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. "But Maya, I'm not some lightweight you can toss over your shoulder. I'm 220 and dead weight at that. The math doesn't work." Maya had been doing that math repeatedly during her descent from Kowalski's position. Sullivan was right. The physics were brutal. Carrying 220 pounds up unstable terrain that had challenged her with 170 pounds load seemed beyond the realm of possibility. But Maya had learned something during her military service. Impossible was often just another word for hasn't been done yet. "The math worked for Kowalski," she pointed out, beginning to prepare Sullivan for transport. "Besides, I'm not doing math anymore. I'm just doing the job." Thompson stirred as Maya worked, his eyes opening slowly and tracking her movement with obvious confusion. The head injury was still a concern, but his neurological responses were improving. He'd regained consciousness during her absence, which was encouraging from a medical standpoint but complicated the logistics of his eventual evacuation. "Where?" Thompson started, his voice thick and disoriented. "What happened to the mission?" "Mission's over," Maya replied gently, checking his pupils again with her penlight. "Right now, the only mission is getting you 3 out of here alive." Thompson tried to sit up, then immediately regretted the movement as pain shot through his injured shoulder and ribs. "The others?" "Kowalski's already in position for helicopter pickup," Maya explained. "You and Sullivan are next." The demolitions expert looked at Maya with new focus, processing what she'd just told him. "You carried Danny up that cliff?" Maya nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to explain the details of that climb. Thompson studied her for a long moment, then looked toward the eastern wall where the treacherous path wound upward through the rockfall.
Jesus, Doc, that's not humanly possible. Apparently it is, Sullivan interjected dryly. The question is whether she can do it twice more. Maya finished her preparations and positioned herself beside Sullivan. The fireman's carry would be more challenging with his additional weight and leg injury, but the technique remained the same. The key was getting him positioned correctly and finding her balance before attempting to stand. "On 3, Chief," she said, squatting down and aligning her shoulder with his midsection. "Try to help me get you up if you can." Sullivan nodded and braced himself. 1, 2, 3. The difference in weight was immediately apparent. Where Kowalski had felt heavy but manageable, Sullivan's mass nearly drove Maya to her knees the moment she attempted to stand. Her legs trembled with the effort, and for a terrifying moment she thought she might collapse entirely, potentially injuring both of them. But somehow, drawing on reserves she didn't know existed, Maya found her footing. Sullivan's weight settled across her shoulders in a position that felt sustainable, if barely. The distribution was different from Kowalski. Sullivan's longer frame and heavier build changed the geometry of the carry in ways that made balance more challenging. "You sure about this, Doc?" Sullivan asked, his voice tight with concern. "I can feel you shaking." Maya took several deep breaths, allowing her body to adjust to the new load. The shaking gradually subsided as her muscles adapted, though the effort required was enormous. "I'm sure enough," she replied, though privately she wondered if she was attempting something genuinely beyond her capabilities. The first steps toward the eastern wall felt different with Sullivan's weight. Where she'd been able to pick her way carefully with Kowalski, now each footstep required conscious effort to maintain balance. The rocky ground that had seemed merely treacherous before now felt actively hostile, every loose stone a potential disaster. Maya forced herself to focus on the immediate task rather than the enormity of what lay ahead. One step at a time, one obstacle at a time. The same methodical approach that had gotten her through medical school and military training would have to be enough for this impossible physical challenge. "How you doing back there, Chief?" she asked. "Like I'm being carried by someone who shouldn't be able to carry me," Sullivan replied, but grateful as hell for it. The initial climb was brutal. Sullivan's additional weight made every handhold feel insecure, every footstep a gamble with gravity. Maya found herself breathing hard within the first 10 meters, her heart rate elevated beyond anything she'd experienced during physical training. The thin mountain air that had given her an advantage over larger soldiers during the approach march now worked against her, as her body demanded oxygen she couldn't efficiently process. Halfway through the first major obstacle, a boulder field that required careful navigation among unstable rocks, Maya had to stop, not just to rest, because her vision was starting to tunnel and she could feel her legs beginning to shake uncontrollably. "Setting you down for a minute, Chief," she managed, carefully lowering Sullivan to a stable ledge. Maya sat heavily beside him, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Sweat ran down her face despite the cold mountain air, and her hands trembled as she checked Sullivan's condition. His color remained stable and his breathing was unlabored, but she could see concern in his expression as he watched her struggle. "Maya," Sullivan said quietly, using her first name for the first time she'd met. "This is killing you. I've been in enough tight spots to know when someone's pushed beyond their limits."
Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak while she fought to control her breathing. Sullivan was right. She was approaching the edge of her physical capabilities, and they weren't even halfway through the climb. But the alternative was leaving him in the canyon to die slowly from his injuries and exposure. "Chief," she finally managed, "what would you do if one of your men was in that canyon and the only way to save him was something that seemed impossible?" Sullivan studied her face for a moment, seeing something there that made him reconsider his objections. "I'd find a way to make it possible," he admitted. "Then trust me to do the same thing." Maya stood on unsteady legs and prepared to resume the carry. Her body protested every movement, but her mind remained clear and focused. She'd learned something during those first brutal minutes of the climb.
The human body was capable of far more than the mind believed possible, but only if you stopped listening to the voice that said it couldn't be done. The next section of the route was the steepest they'd encountered, a near-vertical scramble over loose scree that had nearly defeated Maya during her first climb with Kowalski. With Sullivan's additional weight, it seemed genuinely impossible. But Maya had stopped believing in the impossible. She adjusted her grip on Sullivan's legs and began the climb, using a technique she'd developed during her descent, small steps with careful weight placement, testing each foothold before committing fully. The loose stones still shifted underfoot, but Maya learned to use the instability to her advantage, riding the movement rather than fighting it. "Jesus," Sullivan muttered as they navigated a particularly treacherous section where the path narrowed to barely shoulder width. "You're actually doing this." Maya didn't respond because she needed all her concentration for the climb, but she could hear the amazement in his voice. Sullivan was a career special operations soldier who'd seen incredible feats of physical and mental endurance, but he was witnessing something that challenged his understanding of what was humanly possible. The hardest part came near the top of the route, where Maya had to navigate the same gap that had required Kowalski's assistance during the first climb. With Sullivan's unconscious weight across her shoulders, she couldn't set him down and scout ahead. She had to commit to the traverse without knowing if the handholds would support their combined weight. Maya positioned herself at the edge of the gap, studying the small ledge she'd have to step across to. It looked even more precarious from this angle, with loose stones that might give way under the additional load. But there was no alternative route, and turning back meant admitting defeat. "Chief, this next part's going to be tricky," she said, her voice showing the strain of the climb. "If something goes wrong and we start to fall, try to roll so you land on me rather than the rocks." "Like hell," Sullivan replied immediately. "If we're going down, I'm cushioning your landing, not the other way around." Maya appreciated the sentiment, but she was beyond arguing. She stepped across the gap, feeling the ledge shift slightly under their combined weight. For a terrifying moment, she thought it might give way entirely, but the rock held. She traversed sideways for several meters, then began the final climb to the plateau where Kowalski waited. By the time she reached the top, Maya was operating on pure willpower. Her legs shook uncontrollably as she lowered Sullivan to the ground beside Kowalski, and she had to sit down immediately to prevent herself from collapsing. Her vision swam with exhaustion, and her hands couldn't stop trembling. "Doc," Kowalski said, alarm clear in his voice, "you look like you're about to pass out." Maya forced herself to focus on Sullivan's condition, checking his vital signs and ensuring the climb hadn't worsened his injuries. His pulse was elevated from the stress of the carry, but otherwise he remained stable. The leg injury hadn't been aggravated by the movement, and his color was good. "I'm fine," Maya managed, though her voice sounded distant even to herself. Sullivan grabbed her arm gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Maya, you need to be honest with me. Can you make that climb one more time? Because if you can't, we need to figure out an alternative for Thompson." Maya looked back down at the route she'd just completed twice, seeing it now through the lens of complete physical exhaustion. The path that had seemed merely difficult during her first descent now looked like an insurmountable obstacle. Her body felt hollow, drained of energy reserves she hadn't known she possessed. But Thompson was still down there, injured and waiting for rescue. The weather window was closing, and helicopter evacuation would be impossible once the storm system moved in. If she didn't make the third carry, Thompson would die in that canyon. "I can do it," Maya said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. "I just need a few minutes to recover." She looked at the two SEALs she'd already saved, both watching her with expressions that mixed gratitude with genuine concern for her well-being. They understood better than anyone the physical demands of what she'd accomplished, and they could see the toll it was taking on her small frame. But Maya had made a promise to bring them all home, and she'd never broken a promise that mattered. The third carry would either be her greatest triumph or her final act, but she was going to attempt it regardless of the cost. The radio crackled as Captain Rodriguez checked in from his overwatch position. "Combat Medic Rodriguez, we've been monitoring your progress. Impressive work getting 2 casualties to safety. What's your status for the final evacuation? Maya keyed her radio with hands that still trembled from exhaustion. Beginning descent for casualty 3 in 15 minutes. Combat medic Rodriguez out. She stood on unsteady legs and began the treacherous journey back down to where Thompson waited, knowing that this final carry would determine whether she was remembered as the medic who achieved the impossible or the one who died trying. The descent to Thompson felt like falling through quicksand. Maya's legs, which had carried her up and down the treacherous reed twice already, now felt like they belonged to someone else. Each step sent shock waves of pain through muscles that had been pushed far beyond their normal limits, and her hands struggled to maintain grip on the handholds that had felt secure during previous climbs. Halfway down, Maya's left leg gave out completely. She caught herself on a boulder, breathing hard as muscle spasms shot through her quadriceps. The cramp was so severe she couldn't put weight on the leg for nearly a minute, forcing her to cling to the rock face while her body fought against the demands she was placing on it. "This is insane," she whispered to herself, though part of her wondered if she was losing the mental clarity to make rational decisions. The line between determination and self-destruction was becoming increasingly blurred. When she finally reached the canyon floor, Thompson was sitting up against the same boulder where she'd left him, his eyes tracking her movement with concern. Even injured and medicated, he could see that something fundamental had changed during her absence. "Doc," Thompson said carefully, "you look like you've been hit by a truck. Maybe it's time to consider alternatives." Maya knelt beside him and began her pre-transport medical check, though her hands shook as she worked. Thompson's vital signs remained stable, his breathing unlabored despite the chest injury. The improvised chest tube was still functioning properly, and his color was good. From a medical standpoint, he was ready for transport. From a physical standpoint, Maya wasn't sure she could stand up, let alone carry a 200-pound man up a route that had nearly killed her twice already.
"Marcus," she said, using his first name as she checked his IV line, "I need you to be honest with me about your pain level and mobility. Can you assist with your own movement at all?" Thompson tested his range of motion carefully, wincing as broken ribs protested the movement. "My legs work, but the chest injury makes it hard to breathe with exertion. And this shoulder." He tried to lift his left arm and immediately stopped. "That's not happening." Maya nodded, having expected as much. The dislocation she'd reduced would be stable for transport, but Thompson couldn't use that arm for climbing or self-assistance. He would be completely dependent on her ability to carry him, just like the others had been. The radio crackled as Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the mountain air. "Combat Medic Rodriguez, weather update shows the storm system moving in ahead of schedule. The helicopter window closes in 90 minutes. What's your status?" Maya looked up at the route she'd have to climb one final time, calculating distances and time requirements. Even at her peak performance, the climb took nearly an hour. In her current condition, with Thompson's weight, she wasn't sure she could complete it at all, let alone within the weather window. "Copy, Rescue 6, she replied. "Beginning final evacuation now." She turned off the radio before Rodriguez could respond with questions about her condition or capabilities. Maya knew what he would say, that she was pushing beyond reasonable limits, that additional support should be requested, that no mission was worth sacrificing her life. All logical, rational arguments that ignored the simple fact that Thompson would die if she didn't try. "You sure about this, Doc?" Thompson asked, watching her prepare for the carry. "Because I've seen enough combat to know when someone's running on empty." Maya positioned herself beside him, her muscles already protesting the movement required to squat down for the fireman's carry. "Marcus, how many times in your career have you attempted something that seemed impossible?" Thompson considered this. "More than I can count." "How many times did you succeed?" "Most of them," he admitted. "Then trust me to do the same." Maya aligned her shoulder with Thompson's midsection and prepared for the lift that would either begin her greatest triumph or seal her fate. Her body felt fragile, pushed beyond any reasonable endurance limit, but her mind remained focused on the single objective that mattered: getting Thompson to safety. "On 3, she said, though her voice lacked the confidence it had carried during the previous 2 carries.
1, 2, 3. The lift nearly broke her. Thompson's weight, only 30 pounds more than Sullivan, but feeling like double that to Maya's exhausted frame, drove her to her knees the moment she attempted to stand. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might collapse entirely, potentially injuring both of them on the rocky canyon floor. But something deeper than physical strength took over. Call it determination, call it stubbornness, call it the accumulated weight of every person who had ever told Maya she wasn't strong enough. Whatever it was, it got her back to her feet with Thompson's weight balanced across her shoulders. "Jesus Christ," Thompson muttered, feeling the tremor in Maya's legs as she fought for stability. Maya couldn't waste breath on responses. Every ounce of energy had to be devoted to the physical task ahead. She took her first steps toward the eastern wall, immediately realizing that this carry would be fundamentally different from the previous two. Her body no longer had reserves to draw upon. She was operating on willpower alone. The approach to the rockfall, which had seemed routine during her earlier climbs, now felt like crossing a minefield. Maya's depth perception was compromised by exhaustion, making it difficult to judge distances and step heights. Twice, she nearly stumbled on terrain that should have posed no challenge, catching herself only through reflexes honed by years of military training. "Doc," Thompson said quietly as they reached the base of the real climbing, "your heart rate is through the roof. I can feel it. Maybe we should take a break." Maya shook her head, not trusting her voice to remain steady. A break would mean sitting down, and she wasn't sure she'd be able to stand back up with Thompson's weight. Forward momentum was the only thing keeping her going. The first major obstacle, the boulder field that had challenged her during previous climbs, now seemed genuinely insurmountable. Maya stared up at the route she'd successfully navigated twice before, seeing it through the lens of complete physical exhaustion. The handholds looked uncertain, the footing treacherous, the angle impossibly steep. But Thompson was depending on her, just as Sullivan and Kowalski had. The weather window was closing, and helicopter evacuation would be impossible once the storm arrived. There was no alternative, no backup plan, no option except to climb. Maya began the ascent on legs that felt like water, using technique and determination to compensate for the strength her body no longer possessed. Each handhold had to be tested twice because her grip was unreliable. Each footstep required conscious effort because her balance was compromised. The route that had been difficult before was now becoming a series of near catastrophes barely avoided. 20 meters up, Maya's right leg gave out completely. She caught herself on a rocky outcrop, but the sudden jolt sent waves of pain through Thompson's injured ribs and caused him to cry out involuntarily. "Sorry," Maya gasped, fighting muscle spasms that threatened to send them both tumbling down the slope. "Don't apologize," Thompson replied through gritted teeth. "Just keep going." Maya forced herself to continue climbing, though every movement now felt like a conscious decision to defy gravity and physics. Her vision was starting to tunnel again, and she could feel her heart hammering against her chest with an intensity that couldn't be sustainable. But somehow, step by impossible step, they continued upward. The gap that had required careful navigation during previous climbs now loomed like an impassable chasm. Maya stood at its edge, studying the small ledge she'd have to traverse while carrying Thompson's weight. The handholds looked even more precarious than before, and she could see loose stones that might give way under their combined mass. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "this next part is the worst. If I fall, try to protect your head."
"If you fall, we both fall," Thompson replied. "So don't fall." Maya stepped across the gap on legs that no longer felt connected to her body, every movement a gamble with consequences she couldn't afford to consider. The ledge held, though she could feel it shifting under their weight. She traversed sideways, testing each handhold multiple times because her grip strength was failing. Halfway across the traverse, Maya's left hand slipped. For a terrifying instant, she felt herself beginning to fall backward, Thompson's weight pulling them both toward the rocky slope below. But her right hand somehow found purchase on a rock projection she hadn't seen before, and she managed to arrest their fall. "Holy shit!" Thompson breathed, having felt how close they'd come to disaster. Maya didn't respond because she couldn't. Every ounce of her remaining energy was devoted to completing the traverse and beginning the final climb to the plateau. Her body was shutting down systematically. First her reserves, then her normal strength. Now even her basic motor functions were becoming unreliable. But the top was visible now, maybe 20 meters above them. Maya could see Sullivan and Kowalski waiting, their faces tense with concern as they watched her struggle up the final section of the route. The knowledge that she was so close gave her a final burst of determination that her body no longer possessed on its own. The last 10 meters were pure torture. Maya's legs shook uncontrollably with each step, and her breathing came in short gasps that didn't seem to provide enough oxygen. Thompson had stopped talking, conserving his energy for what they both knew would be the most dangerous part of the climb. 5 meters from the top, Maya stumbled and nearly went down. Only Thompson's quick thinking, grabbing a handhold with his good arm to help arrest their fall, prevented them from tumbling back down the route they'd fought so hard to climb. "Almost there, Doc," Thompson encouraged, though Maya could hear the strain in his voice. "Just a little further." Maya forced herself up the final section through sheer force of will, her body operating beyond any reasonable physical limits. When she finally reached the plateau and lowered Thompson to the ground beside the other 2 SEALs, she collapsed immediately, her legs unable to support even her own weight. "Maya!" Sullivan's voice seemed to come from very far away, though he was right beside her. "Stay with us. You did it, but you need to stay conscious." Maya tried to respond, but found she couldn't form words. Her vision was graying at the edges, and she could feel her heart rate becoming irregular. The massive physical effort had pushed her body into a state of near shutdown that was potentially life-threatening. Kowalski was already moving, despite his own injuries, using his medical training to assess Maya's condition. "She's in shock," he announced. "Pulse is rapid and thready, breathing shallow, and she's hypothermic from the exertion and exposure." Sullivan pulled the emergency blanket from Maya's own medical pack and wrapped it around her shaking form. "Doc, you need to drink some water, small sips." Maya accepted the water bottle with hands that trembled uncontrollably, forcing herself to take the fluids her body desperately needed. Gradually, her vision began to clear and her heart rate started to stabilize, though she still felt fragile and depleted. "You did the impossible," Thompson said quietly, his voice carrying a reverence Maya had never heard from any of the SEALs before. 3 times. Nobody's ever going to question what you're capable of again." Through the clouds above, Maya could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors growing louder. The weather window was still open, and the evacuation would proceed as planned. All 4 of them would go home because Maya had refused to accept that some things were impossible. But as she sat on that mountain plateau, wrapped in an emergency blanket and surrounded by 3 men whose lives she'd saved through sheer determination, Maya realized that the most important victory wasn't proving others wrong about her capabilities. It was proving to herself that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The helicopter's rotor wash created a whirlwind of dust and debris as it settled onto the plateau, but Maya barely registered the noise. She sat wrapped in the emergency blanket, watching through exhausted eyes as the crew chief and flight medic rushed toward them with a stretcher and medical equipment. The cavalry had finally arrived, but the real rescue had already happened through sheer force of will and determination that defied every law of physics. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the flight medic, dropped to her knees beside Maya first, despite the obviously wounded SEALs waiting nearby. "Ma'am, I need to check your vitals. The crew chief says you carried all 3 of these men up that mountain." Maya nodded weakly, not trusting her voice yet. Santos began a rapid medical assessment, checking Maya's pulse, blood pressure, and temperature while asking questions about pain levels and symptoms. The readings told a story of someone who had pushed her body far beyond sustainable limits. "Your heart rate is still elevated, blood pressure's low, and you're showing signs of severe dehydration and exposure," Santos reported. "You need IV fluids and immediate rest." "The others first," Maya managed to say, gesturing toward the 3 SEALs. "They're the priority casualties." Sullivan looked at Sullivan, Thompson, and Kowalski, all of whom were conscious and stable despite their injuries. "Ma'am, with respect, they're not the ones who look like they're about to collapse.
You carried them to safety, but someone needs to take care of you now. The helicopter crew worked with practiced efficiency, loading all 4 patients for transport back to Forward Operating Base Thunder. Maya found herself on a stretcher despite her protests, with an IV line running fluids to address her dehydration and exposure. Beside her, the 3 SEALs were secured for transport, their more serious injuries stabilized for the flight. As the helicopter lifted off from the plateau, Maya looked down at the canyon where she'd found the wounded men and the treacherous route she'd climbed 3 times. From this aerial perspective, the path looked even more impossible than it had felt during the climbs. The narrow ledges, unstable rockfall, and near-vertical sections created a route that no reasonable person would attempt, even without carrying additional weight. "Doc," Sullivan's voice cut through the helicopter noise via the intercom system. "I've been thinking about what happened down there."
Maya turned her head to look at him, noting that his color had improved significantly during the flight. "I've been a SEAL for 15 years, Sullivan continued. "I've served with some of the strongest, toughest people on the planet. What you did today, that wasn't just about physical strength. That was something else entirely." Thompson's voice joined the conversation. "I felt it during that last climb. There were moments when your body was completely done, but you kept going anyway. That's not training or conditioning. That's something you either have or you don't." Kowalski, despite his chest injury, managed to add his perspective. "Most people would have looked at that route and said it was impossible. You looked at it and figured out how to make it possible. 3 times, while we were dead weight." Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of their words more than she'd felt their physical weight during the climbs. These men understood better than anyone what she'd accomplished, because they knew the physical and mental demands of extreme operations. Their recognition meant more than any official commendation ever could. The helicopter touched down at Thunder's medical facility 20 minutes later, where Dr. Patterson and the entire medical staff waited with gurneys and equipment. Maya tried to protest being wheeled into the trauma bay ahead of the others, but her exhausted body overruled her objections. "Rodriguez," Dr. Patterson said as he began his examination, "I've been getting radio reports for the last 6 hours that sound like fiction. Did you really carry 3 SEALs individually up that mountain?" "Yes, sir," Maya replied, though the achievement still felt surreal even to her. Patterson's examination was thorough but revealed what Maya already knew: severe exhaustion, dehydration, and muscle strain, but no permanent damage. Her body had been pushed to its absolute limits, but had somehow held together long enough to complete the mission. "You're going to be sore for weeks," Patterson said as he finished his assessment, "and you'll need several days of rest before returning to duty, but medically, you're going to be fine." He paused, studying her with an expression Maya hadn't seen before. "What you did today will be talked about for years. I've never seen anything like it, and I've been practicing emergency medicine for 20 years. Word of Maya's rescue spread through Forward Operating Base Thunder faster than wildfire. By evening, soldiers who had barely acknowledged her existence were stopping by the medical facility to shake her hand or just see the doc who carried 3 SEALs up a mountain. The story grew with each telling, but the core facts remained impossible to exaggerate. Colonel Harrison arrived for a formal debrief the following morning, accompanied by Captain Foster from Intelligence and several other officers Maya didn't recognize. They gathered around her bed in the medical facility with notepads and recording equipment, treating her account like testimony in a court of law. "Walk me through the decision-making process," Harrison began. "When you realized helicopter evacuation was impossible, what made you think the eastern route was viable?" Maya described her assessment of the terrain, the tactical considerations that led to her route selection, and the medical priorities that drove her evacuation sequence. The officers took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification about specific technical details. "At any point during the operation, did you consider aborting the mission and requesting additional support?" "No, ma'am," replied honestly. "The weather window was closing, and the casualties needed immediate evacuation. Additional support would have taken hours we didn't have."
Colonel Harrison leaned forward. "Rodriguez, I need you to understand something. What you accomplished wasn't just medically remarkable, it was tactically unprecedented. You solved a problem that had no solution using resources nobody thought were adequate." One of the officers Maya didn't recognize spoke up. "Specialist Rodriguez, I'm Major Williams from Special Operations Command. We've been following reports of this incident, and there are people at very high levels who want to meet with you." Maya blinked in surprise. "Sir, I was just doing my job." "No," Major Williams replied firmly. "Your job was to provide medical support. What you did was redefined what's possible in combat rescue operations." Over the following days, Maya's recovery was interrupted by a steady stream of visitors. Special operations personnel from other units stopped by to hear her story firsthand. Military medical personnel wanted to understand her techniques and decision-making process. Even some of the base's senior leadership, people who had barely acknowledged her existence before, came to pay their respects. The most meaningful visit came from Chief Sullivan, now mobile on crutches but otherwise recovering well from his injuries. He arrived with Thompson and Kowalski, all three looking healthier than they had any right to after their ordeal. "Doc," Sullivan said, settling into a chair beside Maya's bed, "we've been talking and there's something we need to say." Thompson picked up the conversation. "Before that mission, we thought we knew what strength looked like. Big muscles, heavy lifting, overpowering obstacles through raw force. You showed us that real strength isn't about size," Kowalski added. "It's about refusing to quit when quitting would be the logical choice." Sullivan nodded. "We've recommended you for the Silver Star. It's unprecedented for a medical action, but what you did saved 3 lives through extraordinary heroism under combat conditions." Maya felt tears welling in her eyes, not from the recognition, but from the realization that these men truly understood what the rescue had cost her. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That means everything to me." "There's more," Sullivan continued. "Special Operations Command has been in touch. They want to offer you advanced training opportunities, maybe a transfer to a Special Operations medical unit. Your choice, of course, but the door's open if you want it." Maya considered this unexpected opportunity. 6 months ago, she'd been an overlooked medic at a forward operating base, dismissed by most soldiers as too small to be effective in combat situations. Now, she was being offered chances that most medical personnel could only dream of.
"I'll think about it," she said finally. "Right now, I just want to get back to taking care of soldiers." But even as she said it, Maya knew that everything had changed. Not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself. The girl who had always been told she wasn't strong enough had proven that strength came in forms that couldn't be measured on a scale or calculated in a gym. 2 weeks later, Maya returned to duty with a profile that restricted her to light medical work while her body fully recovered. The restriction frustrated her, but it gave her time to think about the offers that continued to arrive from various military units and medical organizations. The story of her rescue had spread beyond forward operating base Thunder, reaching military medical communities worldwide. Maya received letters from combat medics and other theaters, from military medical schools, and from organizations that trained emergency responders. Everyone wanted to know how she'd done it, how she'd found the strength to accomplish something that seemed physically impossible. The answer, Maya realized, wasn't something that could be taught in a classroom or replicated through training. It came from a place deeper than muscle fiber or cardiovascular conditioning. It came from the absolute refusal to accept that anyone under her care would die if she could prevent it, regardless of the personal cost. Dr. Patterson pulled her aside one morning as she finished her rounds. "Maya, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your future in military medicine." "Yes, sir?" "I've received inquiries from Walter Reed Medical Center, from the Special Operations Medical Training Center, and from 3 civilian trauma hospitals. They all want you." Maya nodded, having expected this. Her actions in Afghanistan had opened doors she'd never imagined possible. "But there's something else," Patterson continued. "There's a new initiative being developed for advanced combat medical training.
They want someone who can teach not just the technical skills, but the mental resilience necessary for extreme situations. Someone who's proven they can perform miracles when medical textbooks say it's impossible. They want me to be an instructor? They want you to help develop the curriculum for the next generation of combat medics, Patterson explained. To pass on whatever it was that made you capable of carrying 3 men up a mountain when everyone said it couldn't be done. Maya looked out the window of the medical facility at the mountains that had nearly killed her, but had ultimately defined her. The peaks that had seemed so hostile during the rescue now looked merely challenging, obstacles that could be overcome with the right combination of skill, determination, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. "Dr. Patterson," she said finally, "I think I know what I want to do." 3 months later, Maya received orders transferring her to the Special Operations Medical Training Center in North Carolina. Her new assignment? Developing and teaching advanced combat medical procedures, with emphasis on extreme situation decision-making and mental resilience under impossible conditions. The young medics who would learn from her would never know that their instructor had once been dismissed as too small to be effective in combat situations. They would only know her as the person who taught them that the human body and spirit were capable of far more than anyone imagined possible. And sometimes, late at night when the training was particularly challenging, Maya would tell them about a canyon in Afghanistan, where she learned that impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet. Because in the end, the most important lesson she could teach wasn't about medical procedures or physical conditioning. It was about the strength that comes from refusing to let others define your limitations, and the miracles that become possible when you stop listening to voices that say you're not enough. Maya Rodriguez had started her military career as the overlooked medic who was too small for combat operations. She ended it as the instructor who taught others that size had nothing to do with the ability to save lives under impossible conditions. And every student who passed through her training carried forward the knowledge that sometimes the smallest person in the room was exactly the right size for the job that needed to be done. The years that followed brought changes Maya never could have anticipated during those early days at Forward Operating Base Thunder. Her reputation preceded her everywhere she went, opening conversations with strangers who had heard variations of the story about the tiny medic who defied physics and common sense to save 3 Navy SEALs. But Maya discovered that fame, even within military circles, was a double-edged sword. At the Special Operations Medical Training Center, Maya found herself working alongside some of the most experienced combat medical professionals in the world. These were people who had seen everything, done everything, saved lives in circumstances that would break most civilians. Yet even among this elite group, Maya's achievement stood apart as something genuinely unprecedented.
Colonel Jennifer Hayes, the center's commanding officer and a veteran of 4 combat deployments, called Maya into her office during her first week at the new assignment. "Rodriguez, I'll be direct with you. Half my staff thinks you're some kind of superhuman anomaly. The other half thinks the story's been exaggerated through retelling. What I think doesn't matter as much as what you can teach my students." Maya appreciated the straightforward approach. "Colonel, what happened in Afghanistan was real, but it wasn't magic. It was the result of specific mental and physical preparation, combined with refusing to accept limitations that other people tried to impose." "That's exactly what I want you to help them understand," Hayes replied. "We can teach medical procedures until students can perform them in their sleep. What we struggle with is teaching the mental resilience necessary to attempt the impossible when lives depend on it." The curriculum Maya developed over the following months challenged traditional approaches to combat medical training. Instead of focusing solely on technical skills and physical conditioning, she incorporated psychological preparation that addressed the mental barriers most people imposed on themselves. Her students learned to question assumptions about what their bodies could accomplish under extreme stress. The breakthrough came during a training exercise designed to simulate impossible evacuation scenarios. Maya had created a course that required students to carry weighted mannequins representing wounded soldiers through obstacles that seemed insurmountable given the load requirements. Most students attempted the course once, declared it impossible, and waited for Maya to reveal the trick that would make it manageable.
Sergeant First Class David Chen, a seasoned medic from the 82nd Airborne, epitomized the typical student reaction. After failing to complete the course on his first attempt, he approached Maya with frustration evident in his voice. "Ma'am, this exercise is designed to be impossible. The weight-to-obstacle ratio doesn't work with normal human capabilities. What are we missing?" Maya smiled, recognizing her younger self in Chen's assumption that there must be a hidden solution that made the challenge manageable. "Sergeant Chen, what if I told you that you're not missing anything? What if the exercise is exactly as difficult as it appears, and the only variable is your willingness to redefine what you think you're capable of?" Chen stared at her in disbelief. "You're saying the solution is just to try harder?" "I'm saying the solution is to stop believing that impossible means can't be done," Maya replied. "It usually just means hasn't been done by someone who refused to quit." She demonstrated the course herself, carrying the weighted mannequin through obstacles that had defeated every student in the class. Her technique wasn't revolutionary, her equipment wasn't special, and her physical capabilities weren't superhuman. The difference was entirely mental. She approached each obstacle as a problem to be solved, rather than a barrier that proved the task was impossible. After watching Maya complete the course, Chen attempted it again with a fundamentally different mindset. Instead of looking for reasons why each obstacle couldn't be overcome, he focused on finding ways to make progress despite the challenges. His second attempt was successful, and his completion time was actually better than Maya's demonstration. "How did that feel different from your first attempt?" Maya asked, as Chen caught his breath after finishing the course. "Everything changed when I stopped trying to figure out why it was impossible and started figuring out how to make it possible," Chen replied. "But honestly, ma'am, I don't understand how you figured that out in a real combat situation with lives on the line." Maya considered his question carefully. "Sergeant, when Chief Sullivan, Petty Officer Thompson, and Petty Officer Kowalski were lying wounded in that canyon, I had two choices. I could focus on all the reasons why carrying them up that mountain was impossible, or I could focus on the fact that they would die if I didn't find a way to do it. The choice was simple, even the execution wasn't." Word of Maya's unconventional training methods spread throughout the special operations community. Senior medical officers began visiting the center to observe her classes and understand her approach to mental resilience training. Some were skeptical, viewing her methods as unscientific and potentially dangerous. Others recognized the value of teaching medical personnel to operate beyond conventional limitations. General Patricia Morrison, commanding officer of Army Special Operations Command, arrived unannounced one afternoon to observe a training session. Maya was conducting a scenario-based exercise where students had to provide medical care while carrying wounded personnel through a mock urban environment under simulated enemy fire. The exercise was deliberately overwhelming. Too many casualties, too little time, too few resources, and constant pressure from instructors playing the role of enemy forces. Most traditional training would have provided clear solutions and adequate resources. Maya's version was designed to teach students how to function when there were no good options available. General Morrison watched silently as students struggled with decisions that had no perfect answers. Some froze when confronted with impossible choices. Others made quick decisions and adapted when their initial plans failed. A few, influenced by Maya's teaching methods, found creative solutions that addressed multiple problems simultaneously. After the exercise, General Morrison approached Maya privately. "Captain Rodriguez," she said, using Maya's recently promoted rank, "I've been observing military medical training for 30 years. What I saw today was unlike anything in our current curriculum." "Thank you, General. I believe traditional training sometimes teaches students that there's always a textbook solution if they just know enough procedures. Real combat situations often require solutions that aren't in any textbook." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "I've read the after-action reports from your rescue in Afghanistan. What strikes me isn't just what you accomplished physically, but how you processed the situation mentally. You saw possibilities where others saw limitations." "General, with respect, I think most people are capable of the same thing. They just need permission to stop believing in artificial limitations." "I want to discuss expanding your training methods beyond this facility," Morrison said. "We're developing a new program for extreme situation medical training. It would involve working with special operations units worldwide, teaching not just medical personnel but combat leaders how to think beyond conventional limitations in life-or-death situations." Maya felt the familiar sensation of doors opening that she'd never imagined possible. "General, I'm honored by the opportunity, but I want to make sure I can continue the direct training work here. Teaching individual medics is still the most important part of what I do." "Understood. This would be in addition to, not instead of, your current responsibilities. We're talking about creating a new paradigm for crisis decision-making that goes beyond medical applications." The program General Morrison described became reality 6 months later. Maya found herself traveling to military installations across the globe, working with units that faced impossible situations as part of their regular operations. Her audiences ranged from special operations medics to helicopter pilots to intelligence officers, anyone whose job required performing under conditions where failure meant death.
Each assignment taught Maya something new about human potential and the psychological barriers that prevented people from accessing their full capabilities. She worked with a mountain rescue team in Colorado who had given up hope of reaching stranded climbers because the weather conditions were deemed too dangerous. After applying Maya's approach to redefining impossible, they successfully completed rescues that had been written off as hopeless. In Germany, she trained with a counter-terrorism medical unit that had been struggling with scenarios involving multiple casualties in confined spaces. Traditional methods focused on triage and resource management, which were important but insufficient when the number of wounded exceeded all available resources. Maya's training helped them develop approaches that maximized their effectiveness even when conventional medical protocols said the situation was unsalvageable. The most challenging assignment came when Maya was asked to work with a psychological operations unit that specialized in hostage negotiation. Their request seemed unrelated to her medical expertise until she realized they were struggling with the same mental barriers she addressed in medical training, the tendency to accept limitations instead of looking for alternative solutions. "Captain Rodriguez," explained Colonel Michael Foster, the unit's commanding officer, "we have negotiators who are technically excellent, but who sometimes accept that a situation is unsolvable when lives are still at stake. We think your approach to redefining the impossible might apply to psychological operations as well as medical situations." Maya spent 2 weeks with the unit, learning about negotiation techniques and psychological pressure while sharing her insights about mental resilience and creative problem-solving. The collaboration produced training methods that helped negotiators maintain hope and continue searching for solutions even when conventional approaches had failed. The success of these various programs led to Maya's selection for promotion to major and assignment as Director of Extreme Situation Training for the entire Special Operations Command. The position was newly created specifically to institutionalize the training methods she had developed and to ensure that future generations of special operations personnel learned to think beyond conventional limitations. On the day Maya officially assumed her new role, she received a message that brought her story full circle. Chief Sullivan, now retired from active duty and working as a civilian contractor, had written to congratulate her on the promotion and to share news that all 3 SEALs from the Afghan rescue had continued their careers successfully. "Doc," Sullivan's message read, "I wanted you to know that Thompson just made Chief Petty Officer. Kowalski completed advanced communications training and is now instructing other SEALs. And I'm working with a program that trains civilian first responders in advanced rescue techniques. What you did for us in that canyon didn't just save our lives, it changed how we think about what's possible when everything seems hopeless. We're all passing that lesson forward in our own ways." Maya kept Sullivan's message on her desk as a reminder of why her work mattered. The rescue in Afghanistan had been about saving 3 lives, but its impact had rippled outward in ways she never could have predicted.
Every student she trained, every impossible situation someone approached with renewed confidence, every life saved because someone refused to accept defeat, all of it traced back to that moment in a remote canyon when a small medic decided that impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet. The years ahead would bring new challenges and opportunities. But Maya understood now that her true mission wasn't about her own achievements. It was about teaching others to recognize the strength they already possessed and giving them permission to use it when lives depend on breaking through the barriers that others claimed couldn't be crossed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.